And some people go through their whole lives not experiencing, possibility and the joy that comes with even failure. Like, yeah, failure can be in the moment, it can be really, it feels awful. But then you can step out of it and go, okay, well, there was something I must have gotten out of that, right? But if you don't even try, and a lot of people are afraid to try because they're afraid that they're not going to be a good person or that they're not going to succeed, and so being willing to just try and see what happens. I think that was one of the biggest learnings that I probably had from all of this is just try, see what happens.
Welcome, Angela McClenahan.
Oh, thank you, Robbie. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. So, why don't you start by telling people how you discovered hypnosis and what inspired you to become a hypnotist?
Well, I believe it was your very first NLP training back in 2012. I think that was your first one.
It was, yes.
And at the time, I was going through, well, what I thought was a lot of stress. I was perceiving things in such a way that I was feeling overwhelmed, and work was going crazy. We had two properties, so going back and forth between our home and the cottage every weekend, trying to cram everything in during the week. Like, just so many things were going on. I was feeling stressed and overwhelmed. And so I decided to take that NLP training that you offered, and it blew me away. Like, I learned so much about myself. I learned so many things in terms of the way I was perceiving things and the expectations that I had of myself and of the people around me. And I was just so, well, amazed at how this changed my perception on things, that it was like I had just had to keep going. And then I remember you saying, I don't remember the exact words, but something to the effect of, Angela, I think you'd be really good at this. There's a boot camp in the spring. You should go. And that was it just kept going from there. I didn't know where it was going to go, but I definitely knew that this was powerful stuff. And, how it helped me just showed me how I could use it to help other people.
All right, great. And since then, you've helped a ton of people. You've changed your life in some pretty amazing ways. You've
Absolutely.
made some good money along the way as well.
Yeah.
So it's really a great example to people what's possible with this. And it really started with you changing yourself and realizing what you can do with this. That's also what inspired me to do this. And then, it makes it really like a wonderful thing to be able to give to other people and have a great career at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. It was mind blowing, really. And so helping other people with this is just, it's incredible.
Yeah, awesome. So what I'd love to do is explore with you a little bit about how you've changed your way of interacting with the people in your life. Because I know for you, one of the biggest stresses was your relationships and that the people in your life weren't necessarily behaving the way you wanted them to, or you felt pressures from them that you didn't know how to handle in a way that worked for you. So there was a lot of, let's say, resentment or needing to rescue people and feeling resentful about that or feeling stuck. So talk a little bit about how you changed that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I was stuck in a lot of ways. And so, in terms of my personal relationship, I was expecting it to be a certain way. I grew up in a certain household where there was, things just happened in this particular way. And I just assumed that that's how relationships were meant to be. And so I had all these expectations, like of my husband and how I expected him to treat me and how I expected to treat him. And they weren't realistic, but they were just things I had learned growing up. And so, I used to get really upset when he couldn't read my mind, heaven forbid, right? Like, I just thought he would know to do this or that or whatever. And so I was not very good at communicating my needs at all. And so the expectation for him to know what I needed was ridiculous. How would he know, right? I didn't tell him, but I still had all these expectations. And so learning, to let go of those expectations and know that it was okay for me to have my own needs met. because there is this part of me, and, we talk about being a placater or a martyr. And I was definitely a huge martyr in terms of, it was like, oh, woe is me, and there was all kinds of things going on. I can't even begin to explain, but I was, I was under the impression that you had to give without getting anything in return. And so the way I was living my life was just that way. And so by not communicating what I needed, that was just part of being that whole martyr. And it just fed itself over and over. And, through all the training that I did that weekend, and then over the years, because you became my mentor shortly thereafter for 7 or 8 years. I can't remember how long now, a long time. And over those years, you really helped me to see that what I was doing wasn't useful, and that I was caught in this loop and this resentment because I was expecting things to go a certain way, but it wasn't even reality. I was in my own delusion, if you will. And
Mhm.
so learning that that's what was going on in the first place and beginning to focus on outcomes and what I wanted really began to shift those things.
Mhm. Great. And so one thing that I've observed in you is that early on, one of the things that kept you stuck is that you were talking either to yourself or to other people about why things had to be the way they were, and justifying it over and over and over. And there were a lot of detail to this. And
Yeah,
I'm guessing that when you were on your own, you were doing the same thing in your own head. A
yeah,
lot of people who are under stress, this is what they do, and they think they need to figure it out or to justify their position, right?
yeah,
Or to get people to agree with them to feel more justified. Sometimes, if we feel like people are on our side or they agree, then we dig ourselves in even further and basically get even more stuck. So,
yeah,
there's a saying that says if you argue for your problem, then you're going to have it even more.
yeah.
And so you shifted from doing that to becoming more outcome oriented. And what did you change in terms of it being in your senses, or stopping all of this dialogue that helped you to do that?
Hmm. Well, the first thing was realizing it wasn't useful. And so catching myself going, that's not useful. And then kind of like, well, how do I want this to go? And so beginning to imagine how I wanted it to go and focusing on the things that I wanted as opposed to getting caught up in what I didn't have. And
Hmm.
so when I started my mentorship with you, and when I was in your office and observing all these clients and watching how you were helping them to shift and change while I was observing you helping them, you were helping me too. And so you were creating the space and helping me to be able to imagine and really see the potential and see what I was able to do and really get emotionally engaged in it. Like I was
Hmm.
really excited about something for the first time in a really long time. And, getting into that excitement and that momentum and actually seeing the possibility, not knowing where it would all lead to, but just knowing that it would lead somewhere by taking the action and actually being in it and doing it instead of just thinking it.
Hmm. Right. Putting the emphasis on the doing of it
Yeah.
and being
Yeah.
willing to get excited about what you could have.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so over the years, that's been really huge. And when learning to be able to do that for myself, I could see it in my clients in terms of what they were doing, like talking in their head or rationalizing and justifying a position that just wasn't helping them. I've learned that it just doesn't help, right?
Hmm.
Rationalizing doesn't help. It's doing and it's learning, and I a lot about dropping expectations that just weren't realistic of myself and of other people.
Hmm. Yeah,
And
I
being,
remember when I first got married, my husband, he said to me, "Well, of course, now that we're married, you should be able to read everything that I think in my mind. You should just know." And he was only half joking. But you learn pretty quickly that's not really how it works, right? And how do you function within that?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and being willing to ask for what you want, because I just wasn't raised to ask for what you wanted. I just wasn't. And so to me, that felt almost like I was being selfish.
Mm-hmm.
And so it wasn't, but that's how I perceived it. Because if our basic needs aren't met or are not met, well, how do we help other people, right? How do we really step into our lives if our own basic needs are not met? But I didn't see it that way,
Mm-hmm.
which was a huge learning. And sometimes I still have to catch myself. Recently, I caught myself going, well, why isn't he doing that? Right. And it's like, well, because he doesn't know to. I didn't ask.
Mm-hmm.
And so we know that, we're all wired differently, and men are wired differently than women are wired. And so to expect someone else, even another female, to read our mind, that's just not useful.
Even another female, because we have superpowers.
So, well,
Yeah.
how men just see things in a different way. And I'm generalizing, of course, but they just
Mm-hmm.
take in the world in a very different way than we do. And what is important to us isn't important to them. And I really had to learn a lot of that because I just didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
once I, learned it and realized that, what I thought was important isn't what's important.
Right. It was just your idea. It was your rule. It
Yeah.
wasn't the way it is.
Well, that's it. They were my ideas and my rules. And guess what? They weren't very useful.
So talk a little bit about how much better you feel now that you are communicating better and getting your needs met, like from the point of view of your stress levels or your ability to function or to thrive in life. How is that different?
Well, definitely sleeping better. That's like a given because I'm not caught in my head worrying about what will be or what won't be. I'm definitely, and part of this is I would have to say faith as well, right? Because way back when I started all of this, I was also really caught up in this whole competency thing. We kind of touched upon that where I felt like I had to figure everything else, like everything out. And then I began to realize that if I don't have to figure it all out. And so if you don't have to figure it all out, you sleep better. There's less tension in your body and you're able to focus. You can put your energy in more useful places. And so, you can focus on what you want and not what you don't want. Or, Scott will say, we want to be 80% impossibility and we want to imagine what's possible first and then do our 20% contingency planning. I think when all this began back in, 2012 or whatever, I was doing the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was so much in my head that I was like 80% contingency planning and only 20% possibility, if even that. And so I've learned to reverse that. And because of that, I'm calmer, I'm more grounded, I'm enjoying life more. I mean, I'm halfway across the country. I never would have done that before.
Mm-hmm.
And
And what
so,
have you noticed in your relationships? Like now that you've let go and you've given people space to be themselves and you're doing what you need to do for you, how has that changed the dynamics with people?
well, I think they're more free to just be them,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah, they
And
might be going, whew, thank God.
yeah, yeah,
Now I don't have all that pressure.
yeah. Years ago, I remember, and this was still kind of in the beginning of when I was learning all of this. Like we have a cottage, and my husband would go up to the cottage with the guys, and they would have a boys' weekend. And this one, I would have my girlfriends over because it was like, woohoo, I get the house to myself, and the girls would come over, and I've known these two since I was a kid. And we'd have dinner and a glass of wine, and at that time, I was, working at the bank, going to the cottage regularly, and then I was doing all my mentoring with you, case studies, all of that. So life was pretty hectic. And, I grew up that the house had to be clean and spotless. And so if you had company over, like, everything had to be just so, kind of like walking into a hotel room, like everything had to be in its place and just perfect, clean. And this one particular weekend, my girlfriends came over, and after dinner, we were sitting in the living room enjoying a drink. And I was apologizing because the house wasn't spotless. Like I was going, oh, you know what? So, sorry about the dust or whatever. I don't even remember exactly what it was. But I was very grateful that night because I have friends who are honest enough with me to say, Ange, we're not here because you have a clean house. We are here because we want to spend time with you. We want to enjoy each other's company. And quite frankly, when everything was spotless, we didn't feel comfortable because we didn't want to mess anything up. And that was like a huge aha moment. And it really fit into what, I was learning with all of this. And it kind of reinforced it. It's like people are what's important. But at the very beginning, I was very focused on the tasks and on the activities and trying to prove I was a good person in ways that just weren't useful. And I grew up that you were a good person if your house was clean.
Right. And isn't it interesting because you love people, like you
I
are a
do.
people person and you love just hanging out or being social or having those connections. And
Yeah.
your idea of what needed to be in place for people to stick around, to not
Yeah.
abandon you, was everything needs to be perfectly clean or everybody needs to follow the rules. But that wasn't reality.
No. And it's a lot more fun when you don't have as many rules.
For sure.
Yeah. And so these are just a few of the things that I learned. But when you let go of the rules and when you let go of expectations, well, your stress levels just drop because you're
Mhm.
perceiving things in a more useful way.
Yeah.
And so these illusions that I had from the past, they just kind of blew up,
Mhm.
which
Yeah, and
was a
it's kind
relief.
of cool that happens, and then as you're in life differently, you see the evidence that, hey, this is so much better, so it's a lot easier to keep going.
Yeah.
But I know there were times when I was training you that you really were very resistant to taking action on discovering what was possible, right? It
Yeah.
was continuing to justify, but no, it has to be this way.
Yeah.
Whether it was the house you were living in, right? Or whatever setup there was
Yeah.
some kind of excuse to keep things the way they were.
Yeah.
And so it's so important for the people who are listening to know that the faster you're willing to do something in a new way and have this kind of discovery, the better.
Yeah. Yeah, I was listening to one of your other podcasts that you did recently, and I don't remember the gentleman's name, but he was talking about, and we know this: the more you focus on something, the more you get of it, and so the more you focus on hanging on to things that aren't useful, the more you're going to get of that. And so, purposely choosing to focus on, going in the direction you want to go.
Hmm. Yeah, and knowing you're okay anyway, instead of
Yeah.
trying to prove you're okay by pleasing people who don't even want you to do the things that you're doing.
Well, that's it. Yeah,
Yeah.
years ago when I was, again, near the beginning of all of this, I had a great manager at the bank too. And it's interesting how all the pieces fit together when you need it, because she was really good at helping me to realize, that I needed to delegate at work. But I was so wanting to prove that I was a good person and that I was competent and that I didn't want my team to be overworked and stressed. I was trying to take all this stuff on. And between what I was learning with you and what she taught me, was that I was actually robbing people of the ability to learn and grow themselves. I never saw it that way, but it was all about kind of reframing that perspective.
Hmm.
And
Yes.
so, when we try to do all these things for other people, we're not allowing them to learn and grow. And so not only are we holding them back, but we're also, unknowingly at times putting all this undue stress and pressure on ourselves when it's not in anyone's best interest.
Yeah. So when you were making all these changes, did you have some pushback from people? Because people, they like in the moment, they like us to do things for them, of course, right?
Yeah.
If you're one of those people who does lots for other people, sometimes if we start to pull back or say no, there's resistance or there can be anger or whatever, right? If they agree with the old rules, they think we're breaking the rules. So did you have some scenarios like that?
Um, I don't think nothing really stands out like that. Like we were just talking about for my husband, I think it was a relief.
Hmm.
Because it was just the tension between us, just it changed completely. Like it just it wasn't there anymore because those expectations that I had were I dropped them. So that was actually change in a good way. Right.
Hmm.
And from time to time I still have to catch myself and go, yeah, that's not useful. And just kind of, okay, what is useful and refocus on the outcome.
Yeah.
I know when
But
I decided to leave the bank, my parents, they were like, why would, especially my dad, why would you do that? Like, you're making six figures, you're working at the bank, you've got a pension, you've got like this security. But
mhm.
I mean, we know that security is an illusion. But I was in that illusion myself. But I began to realize through doing all of this that there really isn't any security. And security, if you're not enjoying what you're doing and you're feeling pressure and stressed, that's not useful either. And I knew that by helping people, that it didn't matter what they thought. This was something that I wanted to do. But that was pretty big. Like even to this day, my dad's I don't think he's still on board, but that's okay.
Mhm. So you wanted to choose to have a good quality of life and do something that was meaningful to you, and earn a really good living that way. But it did take some risk on your part. I know.
Yeah.
I remember when you started, you did it part time, right?
Yeah.
So you got things going so that you saw you were making a good amount of money before you left the bank full time, which is a good idea, right? That's
Yeah.
the 20% contingency planning. But it doesn't, your dad, it doesn't fit his model of the world. So he has no idea, why would she do this?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but you were looking at it and saying, this is my life. How do I want to spend my life?
Yeah.
Because in the end, money doesn't mean so much if you can't enjoy your life or feel like have a purpose and a mission. And
Yeah. Well, and that
yeah.
was it. When I was working in the banking industry, I didn't feel like I had a purpose. I did with the people I worked with, like the team that I worked with and the connections, that had meaning and purpose, but the job itself didn't.
Hmm.
And so now it's the best of both worlds, right? My
Yeah.
job has meaning and purpose and I still get to connect with people and making this big leap to move across the country. I'd always wanted to come out west. Like I'd always wanted to be in the mountains and that was something that I was never willing to do. But with all of this, it was like, well, of course I'm going to do this. It still was, I had a bit of debate going on, but at the end of the day, it was like, well, I want to do this. And so I can make this happen. And even
Hmm.
during COVID, I mean, I opened up a new office during COVID, and thankfully our restrictions out here weren't quite as severe as they were in Ontario, but there was still a lot of limitations. And it was, so what? There's still people, if anything, they need more help now, right?
That's right. Yeah. And you already have experience with the system. So it's been easier for you to get your second clinic going because now you
Yeah,
have some experience. You're not as much in the rules as you were before.
yeah,
And when you run with this, you can make at least as much or more than you were making at the bank. So
yeah.
it's pretty nice.
It is, and just having people walk out the door, non-smoker or being able to manage stress or even enjoy their golf game more. Like it's just
Mhm.
there's no greater reward, really.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Talk a little bit about how the connection in your relationship with your husband is better now because now he's freer to be himself and you're more relaxed. So share a little bit about how that's enhanced the time you do spend together and the romance and all of that.
yeah, well, now when we're together, like I remember years ago, you had said to me that it wasn't really about the quantity of time spent together, that it was really about the quality. And so, because I always thought it was about quantity, not necessarily quality. Again, because that's just what I grew up with, right? Like my parents spend a lot of time together, and I never really looked at it as being about the quality of the relationship. And now it's challenging, don't get me wrong, because, we are like, I don't know, 4,500 kilometers apart. But I mean, we chat every day and we're more focused on um, making sure that each of us are doing the things that we want to do.
Mm.
So, like, he's enjoying the cottage. He's been doing all kinds of renovations, having the friends up. And, I'm doing my thing out here so that when I do go home, which depending on what's going on can be every 3 or 4 weeks, sometimes 5 or 6. But when we're together, we're actually together and we're enjoying our time together and it's more special.
Yeah, and you're
And
celebrating each other living a full life.
yeah,
Yeah.
and yeah, one of these days I'll get him out here and maybe, with COVID and things are finally settling down where he'll be more comfortable flying because, a lot of people are nervous about that. I mean, I was doing it all the way through this entire thing and just following the guidelines and whatever, but his immune system is a bit off. And so he didn't want to do that. But now, we're both fully vaccinated and everything's kind of returning to normal. So who knows? Maybe, he'll be able to do what he loves out here. I don't know, but we'll figure it out.
Okay. All right. Well, that's exciting.
That there's no rules anymore about how it should be. And so when we are together, we enjoy each other's company. And when we're apart, we're there to support each other with whatever's going on.
You can't miss each other if you're always together.
Well, that's true, right?
It's also not as interesting because there's nothing to share.
Well, yeah. And so, our time is limited together in person, but we enjoy it. And yeah, so it's interesting. Like I remember when Scott Scott would be out on the West Coast and his wife Heather would be, in Florida and he'd spend weeks on end out there, but it works, right? Because when you are
Yeah.
together and if you kind of step out, and I've gotten way better at this too, looking at the bigger picture. The bigger picture is we both want to be happy. We both want to fulfill, our dreams in our ways. And, we can do it this way. And I remember Scott, wanting to do the magic castle and all that stuff. And he was happy. And Heather was doing like things on, with her clinic and doing her clowning and things like that. And so you're getting what you need. You're still connected, even though the miles might separate you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. So share a little bit about how before when you were caught up in other people's needs, part of that was really that it made you not have to focus on yourself or take risks. And so sometimes, and we see this a lot with clients where, especially with weight loss clients, they'll come in and say, oh my God, there's my mother and my kids and my work and this and that. And they have a million different commitments and people that they're helping, and they totally neglect themselves. And usually they'll admit that it feels better to focus on other people because they feel very uncomfortable focusing on what they need to improve or what they need to do for themselves, or maybe they don't feel permission to take care of themselves. And it can be a great way to avoid responsibility because it always looks virtuous to give
Yeah.
to others or take care of others. And when you were saying you thought it was selfish to take care of you, a lot of people feel that way.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about how that it was a hidden agenda you had, that as long as you were focused on others, then, and you thought because of that it was impossible to get what you wanted, it actually protected you from having to take risks or just be willing to admit what you want or take action on it.
Yeah. Well, again, a great example is moving out here. Like I was using it as an excuse because, I had my parents and my friends, like my husband, everyone was in Ontario. And, of course I needed to be there for my husband and, my parents, and my friends are pretty self-sufficient. Now they have a place to visit. So it wasn't really about that, but I had all these reasons why not to, because, well, of course I have to take care of them. And of course I have to do this. And then, actually making the move was a big eye opener too, because it's interesting because I'm not there to do all the things that I might have done for my parents. They're finding other people to do it, which is great because they're actually making new connections. So like there's someone taking care of the yard right now. And so the guy that's doing it, he's awesome. And so they're actually connecting with people in the neighborhood. But if I had been there to do all of that, then they wouldn't have made these connections. So, I was kind of robbing them. And so by coming out here, it was great because it was good for me to follow my dream. And it was also good for them because they were able to, start finding other opportunities to get their needs met.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was letting go of those excuses and those reasons, because before I would use them to hold myself back. And now it's like, well, I've learned how to reframe things so that they're more useful. And these learning experiences are great because I do help my clients with that too, because we do get these people, well, I have to take care of, well, what if you didn't?
And they
Right?
can't even imagine what would happen if they didn't. They think they're a horrible person or the whole world's going to fall apart or something.
Well, that's
Um,
what I used to think, right?
yeah.
And so it's been great because now I can teach people that, the way they were looking at it might not have been totally useful. And if they take care of themselves first and they're in a better state of mind, then it's easier to do those things for other people and you have healthier boundaries. And it's really been something, I guess, because I've gone through it, but it's really been something that I've been helping a lot of clients with because they just don't see what they're doing. And when they start
Mhm.
practicing doing things in a new way, it's easier for them to take care of themselves, right? I mean, I go to the gym a few times a week, I go for walks and just making healthier choices. But before, there would be always other things in the way.
Mhm.
And so, teaching clients to be able to do like, okay, yes, you can take care of them, but what if it's in a different way? What would happen if?
Yeah. So really honoring yourself and having the courage. I mean, what you did takes a lot of courage, right? Like moving across the country, uh, starting a new version of your business, having all the people who you're close to be back here, right? There were a lot of changes that happened.
Yeah.
And if people look at this, you could do this in smaller ways in your life. You don't have, if you want to do something dramatic like Angela, you can, but even making these small everyday changes and looking towards like, how can you add joy to your life? How can you treat your mind and body and spirit and your life with the respect that it really deserves? Right?
Yeah.
A lot of us abuse ourselves over and over again in service of others. And if we do that, one day somebody else is going to have to abuse themselves in service of us because we're gonna have problems if we allow that to happen.
Well, that's just it. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting. So my dad's had some health issues in recent weeks, and so I was spending some time in the hospital, and you know, a lot of the nurses and such, they're carrying extra weight, and because a lot of them are, they're like, well, of course I've got to help these people, and it was interesting because my dad even noticed. He said, how come so many of the nurses are carrying all this extra weight? And I said, Dad, because they're so focused on helping other people that they're not helping themselves.
We have a lot of clients at our clinics who are nurses, a lot.
Yeah,
And they don't even have time to eat or have a sip of water while they're working. And then they carry that into their personal lives as well.
yeah,
So nursing attracts that kind of pattern.
yeah, yeah. And so, I wasn't doing it to that degree, but I was definitely doing it. And
Mhm.
so being able to recognize it, how Scott always tells us, if you're in the bottle, you can't read the label. So having that feedback from you and from Scott and observing what happens with other people, all of that feedback, it really helps to open your eyes because you don't realize what you're doing.
Right. And if everybody around you is also doing it or doing the opposite, but they're part of your world, everybody, all the characters take their positions in the drama that
Yeah,
plays out over and over. There's no alternative option that you can even see.
right. And that's why, having a mentor or a coach of some kind is really valuable because they can see things that we can't.
Hmm. Yeah.
And getting like going to see a hypnotist, in one of our clinics, we can see things that our clients can't see. And so just helping them to reframe and just explore different ways. When I started
Hmm.
all of this, I was definitely not exploring.
Yeah, and it also gives you a support system because when you're changing your life and your current family or your social circle has it the old way, then there's a lot of momentum to keep it the old way.
Yeah.
And so it really helps to have a place and somebody in your life or a culture or a group of people in your life who are doing it a different way. It
Yeah.
helps you build something new.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And so when you're really focusing and knowing that you deserve to be happy and that you deserve to have all your needs met, that's a really big one, because so many people don't believe they deserve it. And we were all born and we were all meant to be happy. Yeah, we're going to have challenges along the way, but those challenges are there for us to learn and grow. But so many people look at the challenges, and instead of looking at it as an opportunity, they look at it as, ruining something or just an obstacle that's too unsurmountable. And so,
Mhm.
with all of the stuff that we learn, it's like, well, it's just an obstacle that you're meant to overcome and learn from. And it's
Yeah.
interesting how things just keep happening again and again and again until you actually get the lesson.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, none of us can get everything we want. That's just life. And one of the
Yeah.
things that we help people with is to be able to deal with having their desires frustrated. That's a different thing from it was totally possible for you to have what you wanted, but you had the story about why you couldn't and then felt resentful about it. Right.
Yeah.
It's important to make that distinction because there are definitely many situations where people can't have what they want. I look at it and say, well, I don't think there's such a thing as deserving because what does that even mean? But it's
Yeah.
more saying, hey, here's where I'm at in my life. What's possible, right? What kind of
Yeah.
possibility is there? And am I willing to admit what I want and risk being heartbroken if I don't get it, which happens, right?
Yeah.
We all get disappointed, but to be willing to go for it and see how far can you take it, and that you can do that and still love the people in your life and be there for them in the ways that really matter. And sometimes the ways that really matter aren't the ways we think
Yeah.
matters.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've been really learning how to interact with all of this in a different way and discover what's possible within the realm you are living in.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be super revolutionary. It's not that it's all about you. You were just way too far in the other direction where you
Yeah.
were making it all about other people. And
Right.
so, the pendulum swings and we
Yeah.
want it to be in a really just good place. It's never going to be perfect. The stars are never aligned, but for you to be able to interact with life in terms of possibility instead of fear.
And flexibility.
Yeah.
Right. And so if something doesn't work out, you learn. And it just means that you were meant to have that experience so that you can move on to the next one.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
lots of things don't work out, but they somehow they help you to keep moving forward.
And I think there's something to be said for having like the big picture vision of where you're going, because sometimes we need to tinker with things or have different experiences. It might not happen as quickly as we want or in a straight line. But if we know the direction we're going and what really matters, it is amazing how often you actually, if it's something realistic, that you actually can create it
Yeah.
for yourself. And too many people give up on that way too early, or they're too scared to even consider what they want. They don't even know what they want.
Yeah.
So being open to that, and then we have possibility and fun and joy guiding us in our lives instead of resentment and duty.
Yeah. Yeah. That
Right?
was a big one before. Duty.
Yeah, it's a dirty word.
A very dirty word. And I just didn't know there was any other way. I just didn't,
Hmm.
because I didn't know what I wanted. I just assumed that, I would be in the corporate world and retire at, 62 or whatever. And I just assumed that that's the way it was.
Yeah, I
And so to have these
remember what
assumptions
one of the
blown
other
up
learnings. Oh, sorry, go
go ahead.
ahead.
I was just going to say, to have some of these assumptions blown up is quite an amazing thing.
It does. Yeah. I remember one other thing I learned when I first got married is my husband, he said to me, because I was being a martyr and doing too much and then feeling resentful. And he said to me, if you're going to give to somebody, only give if you can do it with an open heart where you're not expecting anything back. Because I was doing all these things for him he didn't even want me to do for him. And then I was mad at him for not doing anything for me.
Yeah.
And so he taught me really fast that I should take care of me first. I learned the hard way.
Yeah.
But I think that idea was foreign to me at the time, where it didn't even occur to me that if it's so much easier to give and give in a very loving way when you truly want to give,
Yeah.
which is different from if you feel like you have to do it, or you've
Yeah.
been backed into a corner, or you don't have a choice because you would be a bad person if you didn't. It's more about possibility. And when you're doing what you need for you, then it's a lot easier to feel that way about
Yeah.
giving to others.
Yeah. Yeah. Giving without expecting anything in return.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was a big lesson too, because again, I kind of had all these expectations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that wouldn't qualify as giving. That's
No.
like holding somebody emotional hostage.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a relief. It really is. And, you see it in our clients that, when they realize that they don't have to do something, that they can do something in a different way, you can see the relief in them too. It's just like, oh, I can do it that way, because it just wasn't possible. They didn't see it. It's kind of
Yeah,
like a
and
horse
usually
with
they're
the blinders.
surprised.
It's like opening them up.
Yeah, and they're surprised at how easy it was. Like they thought it would be this big fight or the sky would fall, and
Yeah.
they just do it, and oh, they just did it, and it's easy.
Yeah. And it feels strange
Yeah,
because it
yeah,
wasn't an uphill battle.
hmm,
Yeah. So
yeah. And I'll
it's,
say that with our clients, sometimes when they start to set boundaries or say no or pull back, sometimes people aren't so happy with them. That does happen.
yeah.
And I think you've mentioned so there were some things with you that came up like that
There
along
probably
the
were,
way.
but I guess I've just been more focused on all the great things.
Well, and you got to persevere, because sometimes the people around you need to adjust. They have no idea about the changes you're making, and they're used to you being how you've been for years or decades or
Yeah.
your whole life.
Yeah.
And so they're kind of surprised that it's a new way or it's not following their rules. So being able to see things through and expecting people to adjust around you and get used to it,
Yeah.
I think helps a lot for people to discover this too, because it doesn't always go smooth. It's not
Yeah.
always easy. It's definitely worth it.
Well, yeah. Oh, absolutely. It's definitely worth it, because if you don't try, how do you even know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
it's
some people
crazy.
go through their whole lives not experiencing, possibility and the joy that comes with even failure. Like, yeah, failure can be in the moment, it can be really, it feels awful. But then you can step out of it and go, okay, well, there was something I must have gotten out of that, right?
Yeah.
But if you don't even try, and a lot of people are afraid to try because they're afraid that they're not going to be a good person, or that they're not going to succeed, and so being willing to just try and see what happens. I think that was one of the biggest learnings that I probably had from all of this, is just try, see what happens. That 80% possibility.
Yeah, and that also bubbles over into when you're working with your clients. When you look at things this way and you're more flexible because you used to be in the rules,
Yeah.
and now your clients also have space to really be themselves and to show you what's going on, and you're able to see it. So this really helps a lot as a hypnotist as well.
Yeah. I was just reminded when I first started doing all of this, and it wasn't so much, it was probably with that NLP training, but I think with the hypnosis training too, how the way we approach things is you do it first and then debrief after. I remember how frustrating that was, because I didn't want to make a mistake, and I wanted to have the script, and I wanted to have everything, like I wanted to have it all figured out. And I was very frustrated. I remember that. But I also knew that, you had a reason. And so, yeah, persevering. And now that I train and, been into so many of your trainings, and I really get the value of that hands-on experience first. right? And life is that way. You have to have that hands-on experience, and then then you can go back and say, okay, well, what can I keep from that, and what can I do differently?
Mm-hmm.
But it just
Yeah.
when I just think about that, and I remember being so frustrated. But like I want this, and it's like, no, we're just gonna do it.
Yeah, yeah. I'm reading this book right now called Sapiens. I'm not sure if you've heard of it.
No,
It's really interesting. You should read it, but it's about early humans and how the human species evolved. And they're talking about some of its evidence, and some of it is sort of trying to fill in the blanks of what it was like in the early days as humans, and our relationships to the world around us. And one of the things they were talking about was that we look back at people from those times and think that we're so much more advanced, but the evidence that they have is that those people actually were way more advanced in every way, because they had to survive. They had to respond to nature around them. So their skills with reading the situation, how they use their bodies, their ability to track what was happening, because they had to track what was happening in nature so they could make sure they had food or protect themselves from predators, right? Or the
yeah,
dynamics between tribes. They were so close to reality in every way, and nobody was specialized. They lived in these small tribes where they really had to do everything. And so because of the way we live, we've lost a lot of what we actually potentially can do. So the
yeah,
more rules we have, or the more secure we are and doing the same routine over and over, really the weaker we become that
yeah,
way. So valuing having different experiences. Like my son, last year was his first year at a new school. So he went to a school till grade 4. And then with both my kids, they switched schools in grade 5, which he was not happy about. And so I said to him, it's a great experience for you, because it's good to know you can go somewhere new and make new friends and adjust to a new place. In your life, you're going to have to do this a lot. So the other day, this is a year later, he says to me, I see it was a really good thing for me to go to the new school. And so he was appreciating it, even though he still wishes he could be at the old school, like if he had his way. So anyway, it's good that he realized that, but he's valuing that flexibility, that challenge. And I
yeah,
think that we're really meant to have those kinds of challenges in our lives to stay sharp, to have our ability to respond to whatever we need to.
yeah,
So the thing I think is cool about the time we're living in is that we actually have space to make these choices if we want to. And the whole theme of what we do, our whole mission as hypnotists, is to help other people learn how to make their life the way they want it to be. Because a lot of people don't know how. I know when I started learning this, I didn't know how. That's why I started to learn it, and why I was so amazed at what I could do with it. So being able to make the choices that are actually available to us is a pretty awesome thing to
yeah,
be able to learn how to do.
yeah. Awesome is an understatement.
Yeah. So Angela, is there anything else that you think would be beneficial for people to learn from your experience, or your experiences with clients dealing with this kind of stress of being in the rules, or the security, or needing to be the smart one, or the one who has it all together, and dealing with the stresses and pressures that come with that?
Well, I really think that the value of having somebody else help you. Like usually when someone comes to see us, they're in the pain of the problem, like something's going on in their life and it's not working. And I wish more people would actually, if they're feeling that, if they would actually reach out and try to figure out how to get past it. Because so many people, like this past year and a half with COVID and everyone being shut in and not having the connections, and it's holding people back now from actually going, well, now what? And so I'm hopeful that people, when they listen to this or any of your podcasts, because they've all got great insights and information, that people are willing to reach out and ask for help, ask for some guidance and for some coaching to help them get out of wherever they're stuck. Because it's amazing how different life is and how much more enjoyable life can be. But if you're in that bottle, you got to get someone to help you read the label.
And with COVID, what I think is really interesting is that in many ways it forced people out of their old routine. And so I think that there are some people who feel a lot freer to make choices because it's like their fingers were pried off the edge of the pool, right? And now they have to swim in the pool and they're realizing, oh, I can swim and I'm okay. And then from there, it's a lot easier to make a new choice.
Yeah.
But before that, they were able to keep their hands on the side of the pool and just stay there forever.
Yeah.
And so I think that it really, there are some really good things that have come out of this from that point of view for people.
Oh, absolutely. There's a lot of great things that have come out of it. People have had to learn how to adapt and learn how to do things in a new way. And there was no choice.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And sometimes having no choice, well, then you're forced to make a change.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to hope that people just want to make a change because they're not forced to.
Yeah, it's a lot nicer if you just do it because you want to instead of because you're forced to.
Yeah.
You got more choice if you do it that way.
Yeah,
For sure.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's a different feeling in the nervous system too.
Mm-hmm.
But
Great.
yeah, so I mean, just I'm hoping that people will learn that some of the things that we grew up with doesn't mean we don't have to keep them. That there were just things we learned and they were just, things that our parents learned from their parents. But it doesn't mean that we have to keep doing that same pattern over and over again. And that, you're never too old to change. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I started basically a new career in my 50s. Like, so what?
Yeah.
Right. And some of the people in our group are like in their 70s and they're still loving what they do. And so it doesn't matter how old you are or what your current situation is, there's always room for possibility and change.
Yeah. Great. All right. So tell people, how can they get in touch with you?
So the business that I opened up here out west, it's called Fraser Valley Hypnosis. And so, obviously we have the website, fraservalleyhypnosis.ca. There's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We're, on all the social media. And if someone wants to call for a free screening, they can just give us a shout at 604-394-2094, where they can explore and set up a free screening and find out how they can make some changes in their life.
Right. Yeah. And Angela's in Abbotsford, which is in the suburbs of Vancouver. Is that right?
Yeah, we're 10 minutes away from the Washington border. So we're about an hour and a bit outside of Vancouver. Yeah, in the Fraser Valley. Yeah. So, it's been really exciting. And then there's some upcoming training that I'm going to be posting online shortly too. So hypnosis and NLP training coming up in the fall as well. So those are opportunities to, check this out as well.
Great. Yeah. And you can also go to hypnosistrainingcanada.com to find out more about how hypnosis and NLP training can help you. So we have lots of free resources and downloads there for you. And if you're ready to move forward with this, you can set up a time to meet with me one-on-one, and we'll do a free admissions consultation to see if this training is a good fit for you.
Yeah.
So thanks, Angela. I think we covered a lot of really important themes today that a lot of people struggle with. And my hope is that they start to see things differently. I think you're a great example for how people can escape this trap of resentment or feeling like, or the duty, the bad word, the duty.
All the rules and the regulations. Yeah.
Yeah. And be more in a creative mode and about possibility. And in doing that, just in and of itself, living from that place goes a long way to letting go of a lot of unnecessary stress in life.
Absolutely. Because it's all self-imposed in one way or another.
Yeah. If you tend to sabotage your own success or avoid taking action because you are afraid of failure, next week's podcast is for you. Hypnotist Rose Hong Klein will share with us her fascinating story of how she overcame being afraid of success and fear of failure. And if you're wanting to discover more about how hypnosis training can help you, go to hypnosistrainingcanada.com and schedule your free consultation. Remember to click the button to subscribe, share this podcast with a friend, and please leave us a review so you can help others benefit from the podcast too. Until next week.
You've been listening to The Hypnosis Show with Robbie Spear Miller. Tune in next time to learn more about how you can change your life with hypnosis. And if you are interested in learning more about training opportunities, go to hypnosistrainingcanada.com and schedule a free consultation.